Hello, everybody. It is 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 15th of October. And all through October, myself, Michelle Beckett, and Stephanie Camilleri, we're doing some special webinars on a Thursday morning to celebrate ADHD Awareness Month. Now, what we thought we'd do is there's an awful lot of stigma and misunderstanding, as you guys probably know, surrounding ADHD, particularly how it presents in adults as well as children. So what I thought we'd do is do a special webinar today on ADHD myth busting, which I'm not very good at saying because it's a bit of a tongue twister. ADHD myth busting, so that when you speak to people that you come across in everyday life, there might be friends, family, work colleagues, or just people you meet at a bus stop, and you happen to get into a conversation about ADHD, you'll know what to say, and that you'll be able to bust those myths and kind of permeate that understanding of ADHD, which is pretty poor amongst the general population, I have to say. So welcome everybody to today's webinar on myth busting. And as I say, I'm Michelle Beckett. So welcome to all new attendees that are joining us today. So what I thought I'd do is I'd take you through some slides and then we could have some chat and questions at the end, if that's okay. But feel free to, in the chat, participants, if you want to ask any questions as we go along, please do so. But we'll have kind of live questions where you can actually speak towards the end, which would be great. So really good to see you all. And thank you for attending. So what I'm going to do is attempt to share my screen on Zoom, which sometimes goes horribly wrong. So just to kind of preempt any technical challenges that we might have, I'm going to share my screen and talk you through some slides. So bear with me a second while we do this. So hopefully you'll be able to see my slides. So do say in the chat if you can't, and if there's any problems, because I'm on my own today. So if you can't see it, nobody raises their hand, I won't know. So let's just pick up this on the chat just in case. So yes, and Matt's just asked, you're working to a deadline, it's okay to listen. So yeah, absolutely. You can listen away and the slides will be available later, Matt, so no problem whatsoever at all. So you just go ahead and crack on and do your design work while and listen away. So as I've said before, and this is a real challenge for us, it's highly stigmatized. People don't understand what it is. A lot of people think it's just kids that are naughty and just need, you know, maybe a smack on the bottom, which some people sadly still do. Glad it's illegal in Scotland, should be here. Massively underdiagnosed. People think it's overdiagnosed in this country. And I'll talk you through some of the statistics surrounding that as well. Massively under-resourced. As many of you know, if you've tried to get a diagnosis for either your children or even worse, as an adult yourself, you'll know that it's incredibly difficult and the waiting lists are tremendously long and completely misunderstood. Now, to be honest, I'm going to fess up here. I was diagnosed only 3 years ago, and ADHD had been mentioned a couple of times to me as a possibility over the previous 10 years before I got my official diagnosis at 44. And basically, I was of the opinion that I couldn't have ADHD. How can I have ADHD? That's naughty boys throwing chairs around classrooms, isn't it? So I was one of those people that when ADHD was mentioned to me, I thought that is not what ADHD means to me. So let's try and be a little less, I suppose, cross, which I still get cross with people that don't understand it because, you know, we are so under-resourced and it is so misunderstood and stigmatized. But going back, I have to understand that I was one of those people. So I have to kind of remember that it's not the people's fault that they don't get it. It's just there's such a lack of education out there. Now, what is the consequences of this? It's not just dangerous to misunderstand ADHD, but it's actually deadly. So just to talk you through some of these stats, I'll hopefully cheer you up by the end of the webinar, because these are quite shocking. ADHD is linked to a nearly doubled risk of early mortality before the age of 10. That's from accidental deaths. And more than 4 times the risk of early death in adults before the age of 45. There's been some recent work done by Dr. Russell Barkley in America, and on average, adults with ADHD have a 10 years reduced life expectancy than a person without ADHD, and it's 25 years in the very worst cases. 10 years reduced life expectancy, double the risk of early mortality before the age of 10, and yet people do not understand this. This should be a national emergency. We've got 3 to 5 times the risk for accidental injury. I fell down the stairs in the spring, broke my back, got quite a severe head injury, and thankfully fully recovered. But you know, it was very close. I could have been killed because I was knocked out for a long time. I was on my own, and that was just from me being very ADHD and trying to carry too much stuff up the stairs and missing my step. So I know the risks there, and I know other people that have fallen down the stairs, car accidents, etc. So massive increased risk for accidental injury, and a tenfold increased suicide risk. Now, I've come very close to dying by suicide. I didn't actually attempt it, but I came close and sought help, which is how I got my diagnosis. And I don't know many other adults with ADHD who haven't had some kind of suicidal thoughts. So this is an absolute emergency, and people are not paying enough attention to this. Now, there are other dangers as well. So talking about that reduced life expectancy, adults with ADHD are 78% more likely to smoke. I've never smoked, but you know, my mum smoked. I know other ADHDers that smoke. Nicotine's quite a good ADHD drug, sadly, although it's incredibly dangerous. We have a very strong link to alcohol abuse, risk of substance abuse. We're twice as likely to get divorced. I've been divorced twice, so I'm kind of living the ADHD stereotype here. An estimate, and this is a conservative estimate, is that 25% of prisoners, and that is much higher in young offenders, we are twice as likely to get arrested. 80% of us have mental health problems, usually manifesting itself as anxiety or depression. And most of us don't know that we had ADHD. I didn't know. I presented with anxiety, depression to the GP. I didn't have a clue I had ADHD. Of all the adults statistically that do have ADHD, only about 10% have been diagnosed. We're much more likely to self-harm. This is much more prevalent, particularly among teenage girls. The statistics are incredible. We're 8 times more likely to be unemployed. I mean, just listen to these statistics. Why is this not more of a national outcry? And as somebody's just said in the chat, that you're working on divorce number 1. Yes, good luck with that. Try and keep it that way. I tried to. So yeah, let's see how the rest of my life goes with that ADHD stereotype, but hopefully I'll get it right next time. So myth number 1. Now, there are hundreds of ADHD myths that I could have used in this presentation. So forgive me if you think, oh, she hasn't covered that one. I've only got so much time, so I'm going to do some of the myths that particularly annoy me and that are particularly useful that you can bring up in conversation, because people go, oh, ADHD is made up, isn't it fairly new? And then you can say, well, actually, ADHD cases have been described as far back as 1775. And since then, 10,000 clinical and scientific publications have been published on ADHD, and that was by 2015. So there's been many, many more there. So research studies showed numerous differences between those with and without ADHD, and you can actually see that on MRI scans. I've seen some brilliant MRI scan shots of somebody in an MRI scanner without ADHD and with ADHD. The difference is when we're trying to solve a problem and different parts of the brain light up, not the same parts at all, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So it's not new. we do know that Leonardo da Vinci had ADHD if you go back and look at his presentation. So really, really interesting. I'm sorry if you can't see the chat, hopefully. Let me see if everybody can see it. So allow attendees to chat with all panelists and attendees. Sorry if you can't see the chat. I'll have to try and fix this in a bit, but what I will do is I'll try and read out as much as possible so that you don't miss it. So that's the way you can debunk that myth. It has been described back, several hundred years ago in clinical textbooks. It does exist. It's like saying that the Earth's flat, denying that it exists. And you could almost shame people into saying, well, look, we do know that humans have caused climate change. The science is undeniable. We do know that the Earth is not flat. And it's the same for ADHD. And you could say you make yourself look foolish, frankly, if you say that ADHD doesn't exist. Now, it is a lifespan disorder and it is hereditary. So it is as hereditary as height, as heritable as height. So it runs in families. So there's 57% chance of a child having it if a parent has it, and a 70-80% chance of a twin has it if the other twin has it. And it is, people say, oh, it's just for children and you grow out of it. And it was only recognised in adults by NICE about sort of 11, 12 years ago. So suddenly ADHD disappeared at like 5 p.m. on your 18th birthday. I don't know, maybe 3 p.m. I don't know. But the thing is, because it presents differently in adults, adults have these coping strategies, it's less kind of likely to be obvious. It's more a hyperactivity of the mind, as we know. Some adults think, oh, well, I did have it as a kid, but I've grown out of it. But then they have problems that we've described. So I'm of the opinion that maybe you'll fall below the criteria for getting a diagnosis as an adult if you fall into the right job, maybe have the right partner, etc., etc. But it does not go away. And that you could easily tip back in if things go wrong, your job changes, you get divorced, whatever, you become a single parent and you get overwhelmed. So this is my view. It doesn't go away. You just get better at managing it. And we can see, as I've said, with brain scan differences, the development of the brain of individuals with ADHD is different. Cortical thinning in the frontal regions, frontal lobe, reduced volume in the interior frontal gyrus, and reduced grey matter in the parietal, temporal, and occipital, I can't even say that, cortices. So different structure of the brain. That doesn't necessarily mean we have a lesser brain. We have different wiring in the brain, maybe to make up for it, quicker wiring. We know we can think really readily on our feet, but we do have a different brain structure. And I think that can be used to our advantage and is a huge positive and gives us many, many of our strengths. So another myth, and I'll just move my little window down there so you can see it. As I've said, it's not just a childhood disorder. Long-term studies show that it's a lifespan disorder. And they say that in up to 80% of cases, it persists into adolescence, and in adulthood up to 65%. I would say that was very conservative, quite frankly. But this is the data, this is the science, and who am I to challenge that? And a 16-year follow-up study of boys diagnosed with ADHD found that 77% continue to have full or sub-threshold DSM-4 ADHD. Now, I think once now our understanding has widened of ADHD, particularly how it presents in girls, because it is equal between boys and girls, we will see that there is more persistence in studies into adulthood. Because it used to be that ADHD, the hyperactivity, the boys, that kind of focus, they were the people that got diagnosed. So maybe that is less than in adults, that physical hyperactivity. But now our understanding is increasing. I think we'll see more cases that persist into adulthood. And just to pick something up from the chat from Stephen, you say, Stephen, I read once that ADHD was just to do with diet. I can see from everything you're presenting, this can't be the case. Would love to know where the original data comes from. So yeah, I'll try and get some links up for you, Stephen, and I will talk about diet because diet can worsen ADHD, but obviously it doesn't cause ADHD because it clearly is genetic. So, And then talking about girls with ADHD, with it's a particular passion of mine, and I was proud to have co-authored a paper with Dr. Susan Young, who is the lead author on how ADHD presents and is treated in girls and women. So I'm provide you with a link to that. So a study of girls aged between 6 and 12 with childhood ADHD found that 10 years later, they continue to have higher rates of ADHD and coexisting conditions, including higher rates of suicide attempts, self-injury compared to girls without ADHD. So really, really interesting statistics here. And again, why is this not a national emergency? Why? This myth that it's overdiagnosed as well. And I think Louis Theroux did a program on this, which years ago I tended to agree with before my diagnosis, that he went over to America and saw kids that he was clearly trying to steer people down the path of they're just labeling these kids and just giving them medication and it's overdiagnosed, which is not the case, and particularly in the UK. So statistically, it should be 5% of kids and 3% of adults. And as we say, maybe that's a little bit more on the adult side, but maybe they just learn to cope with it better. We know that getting a diagnosis for adult ADHD is particularly tricky, so it may be higher than 3%. But we know from data from GPs, preliminary data, and we don't have the total data on this because it's really, really impossible to get. 90% of adults who should have been diagnosed, according to those stats, have not. So there's 90% of people in adulthood who should have had an ADHD diagnosis walking around thinking they've got untreatable anxiety, depression, overwhelm, maybe problems at work, problems with their marriage, etc., don't have a clue. This is awful. And we know that children are being undertreated because we do have the data for this. And I know that The Guardian did an investigation a couple of years ago, which I helped with some statistics for, and they uncovered that 61,000 boys between the ages of 6 and 17 were prescribed ADHD drugs in 2018, and that's only 1.5% of that age group. And it should be 2.5% if there's 5% of kids and it's diagnosed equally between the sexes as it should be. But listen to this for girls, 0.35% of girls were treated for their ADHD, 0.35, and it should be 2.5%. Particularly girls are massively underdiagnosed and treated. So again, given that the data suggests that in teenage years, the risk to girls is much higher from self-harm, teenage pregnancy and suicide, and from mental health problems, this is huge. I'm not saying that boys don't have problems in adolescence, they do, but the harm is slightly greater. And just to pick up something from the chat from Matt, that Matt, you have a diagnosis, but because you tried and gave up treatment when you were first diagnosed, you think you were too ADHD to stick with it. You're finding it really hard to get treatment now and you're persevering, but it's difficult. Matt, we can pick that up and I can help you with some advice on that. It is really hard. And again, this is part of we're massively under-resourced in terms of how we get treated. So again, Matt, it's terrible that you can't just jump back on and get treated and stick with it this time. So, and Tank, you've just said that you were a suicidal, self-harming teenager and you were told it was your attitude. I mean, imagine that could have been worse. You could have been saved. And this is just, one of the attendees on this chat. How many more girls out there are being missed, are still being missed? This is outrageous. And Britt, you've just asked about eating disorders for ADHD girls. Now, I do know the statistics on binge eating disorder and bulimia for ADHD girls, and that 38% of girls with bulimia have ADHD, generally undiagnosed. I'm not sure about anorexia. I know that the statistics for anorexia is about 20% have autism spectrum conditions. It tends to be that more girls with autism spectrum conditions have anorexia and more girls with bulimia and binge eating disorder have ADHD. So, but I can find out more data on that. I'm not a complete expert. I've just kind of skim read some of that. And as Tank, you've just said, you didn't get diagnosed till you were 44 either, the same as me, and it put you off ever asking for help, because why would you? Think it's your attitude, and then what's that done to your self-esteem all your life, thinking that that's the case? So going on, yet another myth, which I was at the receiving end of: poor parenting causes ADHD. So research studies point to genetic, so as we've discussed, or neurological factors, so birth complications, brain damage, toxins, infections, as the main cause of ADHD, rather than social factors, including poor parenting. And twin studies of children with ADHD show that family environments of the children contribute very little to their individual differences in ADHD and symptoms. So there you go. Okay, poor parenting can exacerbate it, frankly. As we've said here, parenting practices do not cause ADHD, but they can contribute to the worsening of coexisting disorders such as oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and inconsistent parental discipline, as well as low paternal involvement, have been found to be associated with ADHD symptoms. So that's a whole kind of mixed bag of biological, psychological, and social factors, and you can't really pull the three apart. But a lot of psychologists are of the view that you can talk your way out of it, or you can give parenting classes and the ADHD will miraculously disappear. No, no, no. You cannot separate those neurobiological factors. And this is something that needs getting across, particularly to the school of thought of psychology that thinks it's all trauma-based or parenting-based or food-based. So another myth, now do excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, but it's not COVID, it's just a bit of a runny nose, so I do apologise. Medication turns kids into zombies. And I had this from one of my close friends. When I started on medication, they went, "Oh, you're not on that Ritalin that turns kids into zombies, are you?" So we have a lot of stigma to bust as far as medication is concerned. Now, what you need to say is ADHD medication is highly effective in about 80% of cases. In fact, it is the most effective psychiatric medication in existence. So for any psychiatric condition that you treat, ADHD medication works the best to relieve symptoms. And it's one of the most effective treatments in the whole of medicine. So, you know, including ingrowing toenails and kidney stones and all the rest of it. So both physical and mental. ADHD medication is blooming brilliant as far as how well it works. And if the dose is right, the side effects are minimal. And most medications that are the most effective for ADHD are stimulants. So no one's turned into a zombie on it. And if they are, the dose is wrong, or it's the wrong medication for that person, and they need to kind of adjust that. So medication is difficult to get right. And I know, Stephen, you say in the chat that you've had some issues with medication because of you've got some heart problems, but there's other medications that you can try. But what we do need to get across is that, I suppose I say to people, 1 in 4 adults are on antidepressants. And when I've tried antidepressants, they've affected me more cognitively than my ADHD medication ever did. So that's not stigmatized. You know, I don't know many people, adults my age, that, you know, have got challenging jobs, kids, whatever, that aren't on antidepressants. So that's what we need to kind of combat that myth with, frankly. Another myth that's really, really annoying, and this is one that gets everybody going, grrr. We're all a little bit ADHD, aren't we? So yes, that's like saying to somebody who gets daily massive headaches with a brain check, "Oh yeah, I got a bit of a headache." Really, really annoying. So everyone can be forgetful or distracted sometimes, but most of those people don't have ADHD. And we exhibit those behaviours with greater intensity, frequency, severity than people without ADHD. So I suppose it is a continuum, and that some people, you know, it is a spectrum, and how far along that spectrum you are determines whether or not you get diagnosed and treated, or you need to get diagnosed and treated. I know lots of people who have traits, but their lives are going perfectly swimmingly, thank you. They don't need, it's not affecting any area of their life, and they're really flourishing. So the argument there is, until something changes, you don't necessarily need an ADHD diagnosis. But if something then changes in your life, you lose your job, marriage breaks down, whatever, or you start to have problems with alcohol dependency, something like that, that you then need to get diagnosed. So you have to tell people that our brains are different, as we discussed earlier, and that we can display a lot of other disruptive behaviours as well, which do really challenge our lives. So forgetfulness, we get distracted, we really struggle to concentrate at times, or to pull ourselves away when we're hyper focused, and impulsivity, which can ruin and devastate lives if those challenges aren't supported. But we have those strengths that, if they are supported, then we can really, really flourish. And Stephen, you've just said, yeah, these life changes can tip people over who have traits. So you had a big change, getting married, pressure of running a home, part of a team. Yeah, these life changes and tipping points, as Dr. Phil Anderton writes in his book, which is an excellent book called Tipping Points, can really flip people over, and kids as well, you know, maybe when they start secondary school, for example. So really interesting questions coming up. So I'm going to just take one of these questions from Matt. Do we know if ADHD always has the same physiological cause, e.g. dopamine regulation, or could it have multiple causes, e.g. brain injury and psychological trauma? Matt, I'm incredibly interested in this question, and this is probably a whole other webinar, because I think there are many causes. And I think what will happen is, as our understanding of ADHD deepens, we'll see different presentations which have different causes. You know, there's some argument that it's not just dopamine regulation, there's acetylcholine regulation, which is another neurotransmitter, or how you kind of process catecholamines, of which dopamine is one and estrogen's another. And I know that a lot of women with ADHD sometimes have those challenges with hormones as well, which is why their ADHD tends to get worse around perimenopause or menopause, etc. So fascinating question. We don't know enough about it yet, but there's a lot of research out there. And if you are interested, I can chat to you about that separately. But it does seem to have different causes. But the main genetic ADHD seems to have a different brain wiring and plumbing. So the wiring, the structure, and the plumbing, as I say, with the neurotransmitters, e.g. dopamine and norepinephrine, etc. So really, really interesting. And also trauma, I think, can worsen those symptoms. So loads and loads of interesting stuff to dig into. Now, this has been a particular bugbear of mine, which has come up this week. You can't have ADHD if you have a degree, you're successful in work, you're clever, or you can finish a book. And we've had psychiatrists even saying this. Now, this will really grind your gears. I posted this within the ADHD Unlocked Facebook group. And if you're not a member of that group, please do join the main ADHD Unlocked community group. I'm going to read you out a letter which was sent to a guy called Matt, who I'm chatting to in Scotland, who asked his GP to refer him for an ADHD diagnosis. So this is just to go on myth 8. Thank you for your referral of this patient. He was discussed at the team meeting. There is no evidence from your referral of ADHD that the fact he insists on a referral, presumably against your better judgment in italics, might say something about his personality, but does not suggest ADHD. If he has managed to get it to the third year of a law degree, then presumably he does not have significant cognitive impairment, and is not, of course, the duty of the local mental health services to help get him a 2-1 degree in law. The best advice in this respect is that he works hard. I do not want to offer him an appointment and diagnosis simply as a safety net, just because he might not do as well as he expects in his exams. Presumably, he has no medical training and is not an expert in psychiatry, and therefore will need to accept your expertise. And that's from a locum psychiatrist. I'm just going to leave that one there, and hopefully your dopamine receptors in the chat just say if that has made you cross, because particularly made me cross. Yeah, so unqualified quacks, basically. I think this psychiatrist should be struck off. I'm really, really angry about this. So, and as I just said, lots of success with untreated ADHD, but it comes with a huge mental and emotional cost. It's not sustainable. We can be incredibly successful, creative, but we need help. Another myth, that big pharma conspiracy, which I absolutely hate, which is quite prevalent on the far left as well. And I'm a member of the Labour Party, and some members of my party think that, getting treated for ADHD is tantamount to a black person like whitening their skin. You're kind of just changing your persona, but they don't get it. And that's really, really disingenuous to us who are struggling, and the ADHD medication really, really helps. And as Tank has just said, to act on that document, yes, Tank, we're doing something, and I'm chatting to Matt as far as ADHD Action is concerned, and Daniel Johnson, who's a member of the Scottish Parliament, is getting involved as well. So we'll do something. So let's get this psychiatrist, making a public apology. I'd like to see, really. So the big pharma conspiracy, yeah, it's just made up to sell drugs. I mean, what the hell? Refer back to how much people's lives are changed on medication, if medication does work for you. So another annoying myth, ADHD is medicalising normal personality traits. So, I've had, Michelle, but you're kind of creative and impulsive and outgoing and exuberant is another word which is frequently applied to me. But we don't want to put a label on your personality, do we? And then you have to then start talking about, well, do you know what? Do you know how much my self-esteem has been impacted by this? Do you know how much my life has been impacted? My finances, my impulsive nature, marrying the wrong people, all of these kind of things have really impacted on my life. The depression, the kind of procrastination, the shame, the guilt, all of these kind of things. You just have to be honest and share about how this is not just my personality. Would I have been nearly driven to die by suicide if it was my personality? What about all the people who have died by suicide? What about all the people who are really struggling and are 8 times more likely to be unemployed? You have to refer back to the dark side, as I call it. And for any Star Wars fans out there, and for regular viewers of ADHD Unlocked, you know that I am a Star Wars fan, and I talk about ADHD being like we are strong with the Force, but we can easily go to the dark side. But if we control and get it right, do all the right things, we can be a Jedi. So there you go. So we are strong with the Force. And I apologise for any background noise. Next door neighbour's having a new kitchen fitted. So in case you think I've got people trapped in cupboards trying to get out downstairs, that's not the case. So another myth is that ADHD purely means hyperactivity. And do you know what? I used to think it did. But actually, the stats are that only 15% of kids with ADHD show any visible hyperactivity, and 5% of adults. Now, I can be slightly hyperactive at times, but I can quell it. And that's, I do use kind of fidget tools, which I frequently have scattered around my desk and my house. But most people with ADHD, kids and adults, do not show. And that is quite a shocking statistic for people. People go, when I tell them that, they go, oh, wow. And that then gets them thinking. So really, really interesting. Tank, you just said that you'd want to kind of do some research into in your alternative health practice for ADHD. That would be great. And Stephen, yes, let's be Jedis. You've always wanted to be a Jedi, so have I. So yet in the ADHD Unlocked community, that's what we try and do. So become a member, and we work week on week on being ADHD Jedis. Another myth, so I'm not going to go on for too much longer so that we can have time for some chat, but that we can't pay attention. Now, the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a misnomer, because they kind of brought the attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity under the umbrella, just as kind of an inattentive presentation. So that kind of confuses the issue. But also that we have a deficit of attention. I actually think we have tons of attention. We have more attention than we can cope with. We just can't control it very well. And I actually think it's less of a deficit and more an excess, quite frankly. And it's like, you know, I have loads of TV screens or browser tabs open and the channel's changing without my permission. But sometimes I'll get stuck on one channel and I can't, even though I need to, you know, maybe go and put the washing on or whatever. I'm really, really focused and hyper focused. I can't pull myself away. So I explain it as if I've got an excess of attention that's difficult to control, like a big sort of fire hydrant hose kind of spraying out water, that it's just really, really hard to control where my attention goes. And also my emotions as well, which I'm getting much better at now that I'm doing all the Jedi work that we're doing in ADHD Unlocked. My emotional regulation is much, much better. The attention is getting better as well, but it's a little bit harder to control than the emotional side. But we can concentrate really, really well. We can read a book. I know a psychiatrist didn't give a diagnosis to somebody in one of the adult groups that I saw last year because she could finish a book. I read the last Harry Potter book straight through without sleeping or eating after queuing for it at midnight, and that's proper hyper focus. But we can focus. We just have that kind of task management system in our heads as to what's a priority. That's executive dysfunction. Can't decide what's important, and we don't have that facility. So I'm happy to share these slides so you can have a look at these in your own time, and you can have a look at these and how to kind of bust these myths with other people. But what I'd like you to do, as a bit of a challenge for yourselves, try and educate one person about your ADHD that doesn't get it. Maybe that's a family member, it might be a neighbour, it might be a work colleague. And don't feel you have to. Don't compromise yourself if, you know, at work, if there's going to be stigma and you don't feel confident or comfortable doing this. But, you know, you could, you know, even educate your team members. And I'm happy to provide you with resources on how to do this in the workplace, or come and talk to your workplace about this. So here's a challenge for you. Educate somebody in the workplace about your ADHD. And what we'd also like you to do is take a look at the ADHD Unlocked website. Join us as a member. We've got a special offer for the rest of October. It's peanuts to pay. If you go for the annual, it's 50% off, and we've got 20% off the monthly. It's less than the price of a takeaway every month to join, and you get all sorts every week. So we get 3 live webinars, we get a Wednesday night meeting, we get 1 procrastination buster session every Tuesday, either at lunchtime or of an evening, where you can go through your tasks at the same time as everybody else for accountability. Heaps of emails, support, a special Facebook group just for members, and you get access to the members portal, which has now over 120 resource videos on lots of different subjects to do with ADHD, so you can educate yourself about ADHD, become a Jedi, and go back through when you've got time. So please do join us. So go to the ADHD Unlocked website to join us, but also sign up for our newsletter. Also join the Facebook group and like our page, so you can keep up with what we're doing in terms of helping adults with ADHD. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and see if anybody would like to come in and maybe ask a question live, or even ask it in the chat. But if anybody wants to raise their hand, which they can do via the participant box on the screen, and see if they want to, you can come and chat on screen, and I can let you talk. Or if you've got any questions to put in the chat, by all means do ask, and don't be shy. Don't be shy if you've got anything to say. But this is always the bit where you go audience participation, and and nobody wants to say anything, but that's fine. But if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask of me privately or separately, then, you know, just drop me a note, join the group, and then I'm happy to help you with educating others for ADHD, because people don't get it. And it's almost criminal, really. There's other health problems that if it reduced life expectancy by 10 years, people would go, why aren't people doing something about this? The waiting lists are either not, you know, years long. We've got people waiting years and years and years for appointments. But nobody's doing anything about ADHD because it's so stigmatized and misunderstood. So Britt, I would love you to come and chat. So I'm going to press allow you to talk. So welcome, Britt. I'm going to ask
Hello.
you. Hello, Britt. Welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? The classic.
Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is brilliant. And I have been telling people about it, and having had an experience recently which kind of really highlighted a lack of understanding, which I kind of get that people don't get because this stuff isn't known about. And I did have a bit of a meltdown with somebody to do with work. And I think one of the things that I would find useful, apart from, I mean, this is all brilliant, and obviously I'm looking to share all of this information that you've so brilliantly put together, is sort of this sounds maybe a bit too commercial, but sort of the business case or the positives of being ADHD, particularly in the workplace. So creativity, lateral thinking, the amount of entrepreneurs who are successful. So for me, I would love a kind of a stat or two to help denote that. And I think you might have talked in the past about something like the music industry and the arts, and just something for as a business, because I'm in the sort of field of diversity and inclusion. And whilst it's always good to think that people will act on principle, the reality, particularly in this current economic climate, is they may need to be prompted on the advantages of a neurodiverse and particularly an ADHD employee or work person. And I'm also freelance, which gives me a sort of bit of a challenge. I don't generally tell people unless something comes up, which it did recently. So yes, I just wondered if there was anything, a good source for those kind of stats or that business case.
Yeah, I will work with you on producing. I think we need a one-page PDF to send out, because I have got some stats and I have got some really good, there is a good business case. It is a little bit of a harder sell, if I'm honest. The autistic community have got a brilliant sell for in the workplace. You know, they're kind of, you know, organization, spotting those details, that kind of thing. They've got it nailed. We need to get that same rhetoric out about how, you know, we're creative, we think outside the box, you know, we can think quickly on our feet, you know, particularly in times of change. ADHD is a brilliant times of COVID. We can really sell on that, motivating others, you know, kind of,
and creative problem solving, given the sort of knotty issues that we're looking at. Sorry, I've interrupted. Obviously that's one of my things, is interrupting. And actually that in itself, I've started, so I'll finish that in itself. I have been castigated and publicly kind of shouted at for interrupting, and I know it's not the normal, that, you know, it's sort of okay, and I understand it's very irritating, but I feel it has really cost me, because even knowing the consequences of it and that it pees people off, I found it almost impossible to sit on things, particularly when I'm having ideas, and particularly because those ideas are often not attributed to me but borrowed down the line without kind of acknowledgement. So it's quite a kind of loaded thing for me. But and just going back to the business point, and I'll finish on that, sorry, is I did hear that Silicon Valley and a lot of blue chip companies are now more interested in the neurodiverse community as part of their workforce. But yes, I don't know either what the ADHD particular profile might look like, but anything would be fab, so that would be grand.
We really do need to work on this. And Britt, just to pick up your point about interrupting, and Stephen, you've just said it makes you feel better when others have the interrupting. I've done it. I remember I've had several times during my business life, and I've done a lot of, you know, consulting, strategy meetings, training, been in board meetings, you know, for donkey's years. Somebody said to me, there's something really male about you, Michelle.
I get that a lot. Sorry, yeah.
And I've worked out what it is since my diagnosis, because I used to go, what do you mean? You know, I'm 4'11" 3/4, and, you know, pretty tiny. What is it that's male about me? And it's the fact that it's my ADHD traits, because socially in the boardroom, men tend to interrupt women. as, and it's nothing to do with ADHD, that's cultural and gender issues, etc., and tend to be more forthright about putting their point of view across and their ideas because of socialization. Of course, that's what I do as a result of my ADHD, which is what has led people to think, Michelle, there's something quite male about you. And I think that's an advantage. So I kind of look at this positively and go, well, Michelle, you've kind of and you could look at it the same, Brit. We've kind of broken that gender mold purely because we, our impulse.
Not backwards and coming forwards. Definitely. And that's so interesting because I've had exactly the same comment, that I'm quite male in that way. I think, the hairs on my chin hopefully don't add to that, but that's menopause. I have that a lot because I wouldn't think twice about holding back, because if I've got an idea, I'm going to share it. And actually, on that note, something I've delivered in a training capacity is helping women to have presence and impact, because a lot, as you say, culturally, don't do that in a business or work environment, in a business meeting setting. So that's really helpful to know that is kind of could be where it comes from. Thank you.
I'm really fascinated in writing a piece on this, because there is a real interplay between gender and the fact that girls are so misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, assigned, attributed to other stuff, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, all of these things, rather than ADHD, and how we can kind of utilize the fact that our impulsivity kind of helps us break that gender mold, I think is a really fascinating challenge, a really fascinating topic to get out there. So let's chat about that separately.
Definitely. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your contribution. So anybody else would like to say anything? But we've done 3/4 of an hour, and I hope I didn't talk too quickly to try and get through it, as is another ADHD trait. So, but there'll be plenty more of these webinars. We do 3 a week in the ADHD Unlocked members community. We do a 45-minute webinar, which is available as a recording every Monday, and then a nudge session on a Wednesday night chat meeting, Tuesday procrastination buster session. You don't have to attend them all. They are just there as and when you need them, and the videos and the resources, PDFs, PowerPoint slides for all of the subjects that we look at. We're looking at anxiety this week, and next week we're looking at moving and exercise and how that can impact our ADHD, but we cover a different topic every week so that we can become Jedis. So Stephen, do join us to be a Jedi, and we'd love to see you there. But yeah, do spread the word. I am going to share this webinar publicly because I think it's really important that we get this message across and that people can share it. So I'll upload the video onto the Facebook page, as well as putting it in the members portal for you, and hopefully that will help. But yeah, we've got to stop this, guys. We've got to get this message out. We've got to stop this stigma, and so that people understand just how brilliant we can be if our challenges are supported and just people get us and understand us. So let's do this. Let's get the message out there about these myths. They're not true. They're not true. And if you support us, we can bring so much to the table, as far as relationships, friendships, the workplace, everything. And we're the kind of people that kind of, help make the world a better place with our drive. So if we get better services and get support, the world will be a better place. So I do really feel passionately about this. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. And you all have a great day. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for our Friday live lunch on anxiety. But do get in touch and join the group, and do become members with the special offer. But thank you so much, everybody. And I think I need a cup of tea now. And take care, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.